Hello, everyone. My name is Ara Krikorian, and on behalf of 301, I'll be your host tonight. I'd like to start off by asking you to follow and subscribe to 301 on all platforms. My primary source for 24/7 coverage of Armenia and Artsakh since the 2020 war began has been 301. They are an independent Armenian media company for Armenians, and most importantly, funded by Armenians, not foreign governments and NGOs. As they expand their minute-by-minute coverage of all types of Armenian news and presence in both Armenia and Artsakh, I urge you to follow, support, and donate. I do. Artsakh has been under blockade for well over 200 days now. Given the absence of any international response, it's almost offensive to even be counting or stating the amount of time that our two guests and the other 120,000 other Armenians have been living off rations, and have a lack of minimal human necessities like access to water, energy, medicine, food. It's a very long list. Azerbaijan has continued to take POWs, killed livestock, destroyed churches, historic landmarks, buildings, and they shoot at civilians daily. Azerbaijan has depleted the main water reservoir for Artsakh. They have complete control over our gas, electricity, water, and all telecom for Artsakh after the handover of the Berzor corridor or the Lachin corridor. We have two guests tonight. They have both experienced the entire process over the past few years. Our first guest is Gegham Stepanyan. He's the Human Rights Ombudsman of Artsakh. He was born in the capital, Stepanakert, served his term in Artsakh's Defense Army, studied international relations at Yerevan State University, and earned his master's in political science and international relations at the American University of Armenia. From 2016 to 2019, he was a lecturer at Artsakh State University and also a member of the Crisis Management Initiative team for Artsakh. From 2016 to 2020, he worked in Artsakh's National Assembly as the assistant to the President of the Parliament. And from 2020 to 2021, Mr. Stepanyan was Chief of Staff to the Human Rights Ombudsman of Artsakh. In 2021, he was elected as the Human Rights Ombudsman of Artsakh. Gegham Stepanyan, thank you very much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for inviting me to take part in this discussion. Thank you for always being with Artsakh and for always being the voice of Artsakh. Spreading the information, the objective, the real and unbiased information about what is going on in Artsakh and what kind of difficulties and hardships we are facing in Artsakh. Thank you.
Thank you. Absolutely. Any way we can help, this is the least we could do. Iskajyan, our second guest, is a repat from the U.S., educated in the U.S., he is a lifetime activist and advocate for Armenia and Artsakh. He has helped establish the ANC Artsakh after the 2020 war, and as the executive director, he heads their efforts. He lives in Stepanakert and provides the on-the-ground presence for the ANC in its efforts to build an international coalition of groups and governments to help secure Artsakh's right to exist. We have had the privilege to have Gev as a guest many times now, and his daily updates and advocacy for Artsakh is what many rely on when news is scarce. Thank you, Gev. Thank you for taking time out of your busy day too. I know both of you are incredibly busy to say the least. The limited time and resources you guys have to get the work done I can't imagine. So thank you both for making time. I know you guys both have a very short schedule today. We only have you for less than an hour, so I will make the best of this time.
Thank you.
And getting right into this, to not waste any time, Mr. Stepanyan, I'd like to start with you. It's been over 200 days now into the blockade. We have limited human aid via the Red Cross. What, if any, level of support have you received from other international human rights organizations, such as Amnesty International, USAID, Human Rights Watch, Freedom House? I'm sure there's a much longer list I could recite, but you understand my point.
Yes, of course, I understand. Unfortunately, the only international presence that we have in Artsakh is the mission of ICRC, which has been functioning in Artsakh since the first Artsakh war since 1990s. And Azerbaijan is always trying also to hinder the activities of the ICRC, trying to politicize the purely humanitarian nature of the ICRC's mission. However, we continue to have the ICRC here, which not only helps us with having some kind of humanitarian access, but also is organization that I think that briefs different international actors about the situation that today we are facing. What comes to the other humanitarian organizations or other human rights organizations? First of all, I should mention that no any other humanitarian uh, aid organizations are engaged. We always spoke about the rising the level of international engagement, uh, at least humanitarian engagement in Artsakh, but we do not have any results at the moment. Uh, when it comes to the human rights organizations, such as Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, Freedom House, I should note that if before the blockade it was very difficult for me to have their positions, to have their statements about a widespread human rights violation that we have been facing since 2020 war. During the blockade, all the mentioned human rights organizations expressed their positions and made statements, uh, and the threat of humanitarian disaster was clearly established in those statements. Although Azerbaijan tried to mislead the international community, including those organizations, and claim that the road is not blocked, uh, all those organizations specifically stated that Azerbaijan deliberately keeps the corridor connecting Nagorno-Karabakh to the world closed, and which is fraught uh, with a threat of uh, humanitarian disaster. This was very important because these organizations, as I mentioned, as a rule, do not address the issues of our region very much. Uh, and in this sense, I highly appreciate the positions because the positions of human rights organizations are actually serve as a basis for political leaders, for political decision makers, and their mission is to sound the alarm, and I think their statements are exactly those alarms. We expect similar positions from other human rights organizations. My office in a constant connection, contact with various representatives of human rights organizations, and we are constantly informing about the situation, expecting more assertive position by human rights organizations. And also about Doctors with No Borders, they are also engaged. They have been engaged after 2020 war. They helped the healthcare system of Artsakh uh, after the war and during the first period of blockade. I know that they are um, today also they are providing some kind of assistance to our doctors, but I would like to once again note that the level of international engagement, especially the level of humanitarian engagement in Artsakh, is very, very limited, and we also should work in this direction to have more attention to Artsakh and more engagement.
Thank you for that, Gegham. On that point, I am fairly ignorant to this, so I have this question, as I'm sure others do. We hear about Kosovo. We hear about many other disputed territories and people who want the right to self-determination. Um, Is this the same case for all of them? Do they receive the aid? Do they receive the attention, or sorry, lack thereof, as Artsakh? Or is there a double standard when it comes to the other countries that I'm assuming Artsakh's representatives bring up to international bodies when they're trying to receive that attention and that aid?
Based on the experience, on my experience, it is really very hard to get into contact with representatives of international organizations and also with UN bodies. Not only human rights organizations, but also the organizations that are created for serving the entire population of our globe. I think that there are double standards, and actually different organizations are more engaged in other places than in Artsakh. Just if we are to compare the engagement of international organizations in post-Soviet conflict areas, uh, Abkhazia, South Ossetia, Karabakh, Nagorno-Karabakh, we can say that in Abkhazia and South Ossetia there is UN engagement, but there is no any engagement in Artsakh. And we see that representatives of different organizations always speak about the need for access for them, but we see that they are not uh, assertive enough to pave a way to Artsakh, to be represented in Artsakh. They justify their position with saying that, you know, Azerbaijan does not allow us to be represented in Artsakh, to function in Artsakh and to help people. Just one example: after the war, Save the Children was planning to have representative in Artsakh and uh, to help the people, the children of Artsakh. But after 1-2 visits, they said that Baku is informed about their plans, and so they should uh, cut any connection with Artsakh. And after that, we have no any contact with them. I mean, anytime, even for human rights organizations, Azerbaijan is making political hindrances, and they do not resist. They continue the policy line of Azerbaijan, saying that they should have permission from them in order to function in Artsakh. And this is really a double standard approach. And if in different conflict areas they are functioning freely, in our case, we do not see any engagement.
Thank you, Gegham. Earlier this month, you published a 6-month report outlining individual and collective human rights violations during the ongoing blockade. Can you share some of those most recent highlights from your report for us?
We are currently working on an updated version of that report. We are collecting more information, more facts. We are conducting new interviews with the different representatives of our society. We will try to have new human stories, especially from our citizens living in the communities which are located very close to the contact line, and also will pay more attention on constant shootings by the Azerbaijani side on the direction of our citizens while doing agricultural works. Uh, uh, Basically, the rights that were presented in our report and the violations of the rights of our people are the same. I mean, in this sense, the situation uh, continues to be very catastrophic, And since June 15, we are facing new challenges because I think you know that since June 15, Azerbaijan banned humanitarian access, all kinds of humanitarian transportation to Artsakh. And since June 15, we have 0 tons of of transportation of humanitarian goods. I mean food and other goods of first necessity. Only the ICRC is functioning and transporting patients from Stepanakert to the medical institutions of Armenia and bringing them back. And also they bring a very limited amount of medication. But the problem with food is very acute, and it is getting worse day by day. We have very limited food production in Artsakh, which does not correspond to the demand, to the local demand, and the threat of starvation is really high now. We have some very limited resources in terms of, for example, wheat, but you know, it is not enough for breeding the entire population for a long time. And that's why I mentioned that really during this 7 month of blockade, the threat of starvation now is higher than any time before. So we and there, you know, more and more people are losing their jobs. So their number reached more, by our estimations, reached more than 15,000, and the social economic situation is getting worse. The numbers, the indicators we will present in our report that we will publish in the coming week, but in general, if I am to describe the situation with human rights protection, with the humanitarian situation, I will say that we are in a verge of humanitarian catastrophe. And if this situation is not going to change during coming 7 to 10 days, then starvation or other kind of humanitarian catastrophic consequences are inevitable.
And on that note, I mean, the blockade hasn't just affected you as the human rights ombudsman. You're also there as a citizen living in Artsakh with family. Can you share more of your personal story, bearing the hardships of this blockade? I think it'll make people understand a little bit better.
You know, my family and I are experiencing the same difficulties that thousands of Artsakh families. I mentioned that there are food shortages, everything is in a very short supply, and as all families of Artsakh, we are experiencing the same problems. At the beginning of the blockade, I was in Yerevan and I stayed there for 3 months, separated from my family, and I was able to return home only after 3 months with Russian peacekeepers. And I can say that it is really unbearable bad feeling when the road leading home is closed. Fortunately, I was able to return. Actually, I don't really like to talk about my problems or my family problems. It is an ordinary Artsakh family that experiences the same difficulties. Of course, there are many hardships in organizing daily life. There are not enough products. There are also children in our family. If we can buy very few fruits or vegetables, priority for them because they need it the most. But psychologically, the most difficult thing is uncertainty about the future. The most difficult moments are when you come home from work, the family members are waiting for good news from you, but you have nothing to say. And every day, people, including my family members, are waiting for the blockade to end. People are patiently going through the hardships, hoping that eventually it will end with some good news. By the way, today is the birthday of my niece. Of course, she dreamed of joy and big celebration, but the reality dictates something else. Because thousands of children are just deprived of joy and celebration in Artsakh. The childhood of our children is disrupted. Their carefree life seems to have stopped. There is literally nothing in the store that you can buy and give some joy to our children. Perhaps the greatest gift is this homeland that we try to keep, we try to regain and to inherit them.
Thank you, Gegham. I don't have much to say. It's naturally we're not in Stepanakert right now. We're not in Martuni. We're not in Artsakh experiencing this. It's it's definitely something that I believe everyone here on this space wants to learn how they can help more for those in Artsakh. I mean, you mentioned food. I mean, my understanding is also that just basic goods are at astronomical prices right now. Tomatoes, cucumbers, other basic needs. I mean, people are losing their jobs, their ability to have an income to buy those foods. Um, uh, Not just on the food front, but on any of the topics that you've discussed. Um, how can we help in the diaspora in Armenia without distorting the economy of Artsakh? How can we help in your initiatives? What is it that we can do as Armenians, as a global Armenian nation, to help somewhat alleviate this absolute catastrophe that's befallen 120,000 people? And to your point, expanding on your point, a lot of people don't understand that this is the first time in 1,000 years that Armenians didn't lose land. The Artsakh liberation movement was the first time that um, we not only kept land but liberated Armenians that were under subjugation. And not a generation later, and that has completely turned upside down, and 120,000 civilians are experiencing this on a daily basis with nearly zero attention by any international bodies to what Gegham had mentioned. So, summarizing that, Gegham, how can we help as listeners, as Armenians, anywhere we are, with your efforts?
Just about the my initiatives and my activities, I can say that the diaspora lawyers, diaspora organizations are helping me pretty well with their professional advices, by presenting the reports that we prepare to in different platforms, or simply by being in direct contact with me. And I'm really very grateful for that. We are in a constant contact with Armenian lawyers in different countries. We have an established format. We meet remotely several times a week, and we discuss what we need to do in the legal field. However, only legal work is not enough, especially in the conditions of new geopolitical realities. You know, what comes to the question what diaspora can do, I think that during these more than 30 years of Artsakh independence, diaspora was always with the people of Artsakh, helping in developing our country. and diaspora was with us during the war. And today also I feel support by diaspora organizations, by individuals. And I think that this support, this assistance by diaspora should continue. I know that there were some disappointments as a result of the war, but I think that the goal of keeping Artsakh Armenian is uh, more important than such kind of disappointments. So we must continue to act together in Armenia, in Artsakh, and in diaspora to finally achieve our goal, finally achieve the recognition of the right to self-determination of Artsakh people. I think that diaspora members of our diaspora should be more active uh, in and more assertive in their uh, countries, just to bring the very, very pure truth about the situation in Artsakh, and saying that, the right to self-determination of Artsakh people is equal to the right to life of people living in Artsakh. And if we can convey this truth to the leadership of different countries, we will have supporters of our right to self-determination. And in that case, for example, the US ambassador will not say that they believe that Armenians can live safely in Azerbaijan. And I think that really diaspora has a lot to do in this matter. In terms of humanitarian assistance, I think that there are many channels to help people living in Artsakh. With the government, there are departments within the government of Artsakh. There are other NGOs and funds functioning in Artsakh for helping people with their daily life. I think if anyone in diaspora wants to be helpful, there are many ways to be helpful.
Thank you, Gegham. I think this is a great transition point to Gev. Um, uh, uh, Gev, I haven't asked you any questions yet. I apologize. The amount of work you're doing in parallel with the Armenian government, with the ANC Artsakh, um, is also immense. You're working with international bodies through the ANC's network on a daily basis. Can you give us um, can you give us a just an update on what the ANC's initiatives are, ANC initiatives in Artsakh, in the U.S., international bodies, just to give people a primer on what you and the other ANCs are doing for Artsakh?
Absolutely. Thank you, Ara. So just to touch up on, the last point in terms of what diasporans could do, I think that's on two fronts. One is on the advocacy end, the work that the ANC does to get in contact with legislators, world leaders, parliamentarians, congressmen, senators throughout the world to tell them about the issue of Artsakh, to use the agency that they have in the nations that they live in to help lobby on behalf of Artsakh for their right to self-determination, for their right to live freely and independently, and for their right on the most basic level to exist as a nation, as a people, as a culture. On the second front, I think what we need to do and what needs to be actively worked upon on the humanitarian end is to help build the self-sustainability of Artsakh, whether that is the energy sector, whether that is the food sector, whether that is in any other sector that helps us become independent, helps us become non-reliant. And there's many organizations that work on that thoroughly, day in and day out. From the ARET, from organizations like the Armenian Relief Society to organizations like Artsakh Support Body, the Lori Humanitarian Fund, that are actively building greenhouses, actively setting up solar installations, actively aiding the people in the rural villages. And these are important Not just because they are, and I don't look at this as charity, or I don't look at this as, helping out. I look at this as a nation building process. And these are incredibly important even for us politically, because the more self-sustainability that Artsakh has in terms of the energy sector, in terms of our food sector, in terms of being able to feed our population, being able to keep our lights on, the more we can withstand the political pressure that Azerbaijan tries to lobby upon us. The more independent that we are here in Artsakh, the more cachet and capital that we have that we can transfer onto the political level. Now, in terms of the work that the ANC is doing, we're working with all of our branches throughout the world. We have ANC offices in 5 continents, and we are setting up meetings with parliamentarians, congressmen, senators, to help lobby for this issue, and not just lobby for this issue, but help connect them with people in Artsakh, with representatives in Artsakh. For example, Mr. Stepanyan and I just last week held a call with dozens of congressional offices where we had a chance to explain the situation on the ground and lobby on behalf of the people. And I also think that it's even more important to have voices from Artsakh here with us in this process, because many times, whether we're talking about in the United States, whether we're talking about in Brussels, whether we're talking about in Moscow, or in any power center of the world, we have foreign nations, foreign interests trying to dictate the fate of Artsakh. And very rarely do we have representatives from Artsakh, from the democratically elected representatives in Artsakh, being a voice to that process. And no deal, no negotiation, no peace treaty is legitimate without the voices of Artsakh included. And that's going to be our efforts moving forward. And I'm sure that we can get into some of the legislative priorities and some of the more specifics later on. But at the crux of this issue is to make sure that in any process, in any negotiation, in any discussion, the voice of the people of Artsakh is always centered.
Thank you, Gev. And I mean, on that front, do you have any general updates? I mean, we've been speaking about this topic on and off for about 6 months now. What are the major challenges that you're facing? Because you've been in the trenches dealing with this on a daily basis as Mr. Stepanyan, but as the ANC Artsakh representative and dealing with the network of ANCs globally, do you have any major updates to share over the past month or two that people would need to know about, or are there specific challenges that you guys are experiencing?
So in terms of challenges, what we've realized, on our calls, whether it's with members of European Parliament, whether it's members of, the Canadian Parliament or the Congress and Senate of the United States, we actually have, I would say, a very strong support on behalf of legislators. So when we talk to congressmen, senators, and elected representatives, we always hear positive things. Our difficulties and our challenges come within the foreign policy and state institutions like the State Department that have their own set up, diplomatic policy that often is not representative of the legislators that enact these policies. So what do I mean by that? Oftentimes we have congressmen currently calling for the independence of Artsakh. We have congressmen currently putting bills on the floor to cut all military aid to Azerbaijan. Yet the State Department is always our biggest challenge. And we're working within the levers of power to influence the power brokers in the State Department. For example, a couple of weeks ago, I spoke to Assistant Deputy Secretary of State, Elizabeth Olsen, and the conversation that we had, and this is what we're working towards now, is making sure that during this humanitarian crisis, the United States, through USAID, is allocating funds to Artsakh. And this is something that Mr. Stepanyan touched upon and you spoke about double standards and selective diplomacy on behalf of the United States. In any other crisis region around the world, the United States, through USAID, is freely allocating money and resources to meet these needs. So why do those preconditions not apply to Artsakh? What is their...
If I'm not mistaken,
Yeah.
they're obstructing that. I mean, if I remember
Yes.
the discussion clearly.
And our conversation has been, in the beginning, they were saying, look, we know that there's a crisis on the ground. We don't know if it's a full-blown humanitarian crisis because there are peacekeeping contingencies bringing in supplies. The Red Cross is bringing in supplies. Now we're going back to them and saying, well, since June 15th, not a single peacekeeping contingency has brought in any supplies into Artsakh. And as Mr. Stepanyan correctly stated, in a week or two, we're going to be facing real problems with malnutrition, real problems with even, to the extent of starvation here in Artsakh. And by every single condition, by every single standard, this is a full-blown humanitarian crisis. So our advocacy has to be, aimed towards that. Some positive news that we do have, though, is during this year's NDAA that has just been released. For those that are unfamiliar, the NDAA is the largest bill that the Congress passes. It is their annual defense spending, and it's to the tune of almost $900 billion. And in this NDAA, we have 13 different provisions brought on by various congressmen that ask for USAID to allocate funds to Artsakh for crisis management, ask to provide reports on a monthly basis about what's going on, and ask to enact punitive measures, which is the most important thing for us, to punish Azerbaijan for their ongoing blockade. Because statements, condemnation, which we've heard through many nations, that's a good start. But if there are no punitive measures, then Azerbaijan has zero incentive to stop their actions. So our efforts are going to be, at most, focused towards that.
And the way we as Armenians can help is through the ANCA's website.
I'm sorry, can you repeat?
How do we support those efforts? Is it through the ANCA website?
Absolutely. You can go to anca.org. You can sign up to be a rapid responder. And we've done it in such a seamless way that all you need to do is put in your email address. We'll help send you links to tweet out to various representatives. We'll help automate messages, emails, letters, and calls to your congressmen and your senators. And what's incredibly important, we'll keep you up to date with what's going on in Artsakh on a daily level. Because at first we need to be educated with what's going on, and then we need to take action. So the ANC is building that bridge between information and action always.
Thank you, Gev. Mr. Stepanyan, I do believe that I was supposed to end this by around 10:45 our time, 9:45 yours. Do you still have a couple minutes? I'm going to take that as a yes. For one of our last questions, this applies to both of you, but I'd like to hear from Mr. Stepanyan. With the installation of the concrete wall at the Berzor or Lachin corridor and the recent attacks in Marduni and Mardagert, what are your suspicions on what Azerbaijan's strategy is over these next few weeks? As you guys have both stated, Artsakh is in a dire situation with little to no food and a near complete blockade. And now we're seeing essentially the vice tightening. What do you guys both foresee as these next steps that Azerbaijan is trying to implement?
Sorry, I will leave you because I have a press conference starting at 10 a.m. But before that, I just want to say regarding your question that we should be very, very clear that the goal of Azerbaijan is to evict Armenian population from Artsakh and to forcibly subjugate Artsakh people to their so-called reintegration agenda. And all the actions that they are doing and they plan to do are just serve to this purpose. Today, Azerbaijan is talking about new tax the public television of Azerbaijan is conducting a poll to find out the reaction of their population about a new military attacks. They are spreading misinformation about the ceasefire violation by the Armenian side. So I think that they are preparing new grounds for new military attacks against the Artsakh people. And besides, they are trying by starvation, by the threat of starvation, to subjugate our population, comparing Artsakh people with wild cat. They are declaring that even a wild cat can be domesticated if you keep it hungry. So the policy of Azerbaijan is pretty clear. All that they will continue to do will serve for forcibly subjugating our population to their integration, so-called integration agenda. And Azerbaijan will continue to do the same as long as there is no punitive measures by the international community. As Mr. Iskajyan said, really, the situation can be changed if Azerbaijan is sanctioned, or if Azerbaijan feels that the, their actions are stopped by the international community, by international organizations. And I'm talking not only about UN or about Western countries. I'm talking also about the Russian peacekeepers who have real mission to provide security for our people. As long as we do not accept their reintegration, as long as we continue our resistance, we continue to insist on our self-determination, the situation will continue, and with new crimes committed by the Azerbaijani side.
Mr. Stepanyan, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate the time you dedicated for us for this discussion. I don't have much to say. I appreciate the work you do on a daily basis, and thank you for everything you're doing for the Armenian people.
Thank you.
Gev, I believe I have you for a few more minutes, so maybe we can wrap this up with a couple extra questions. If you do have a few minutes for us.
Yeah, I've got like 5-10 more minutes.
Okay. On Mr. Stepanyan's point, when you hear the U.S. ambassador saying that Armenians can live safely and happily in Azerbaijan, and when we hear these hopes and dreams coming from our representatives, I believe most of the listeners here are probably from the West, and probably a majority of them living in the United States. What impact does that have to Armenians in Artsakh hearing that? But two, what is it that we need to be doing more to put pressure on our own representatives? Because it's very disheartening as an Armenian in the diaspora, hearing our own representatives, whether it's through U.S. aid, blocking needs assessments for Artsakh, which you mentioned. Samantha Power, who, by the way, up until recently was very much an advocate for the Armenian genocide recognition for everything Armenian up until she got into DC, and now is almost being an obstructionist when it comes to our issues. When it comes to the current U.S. ambassador, who is actively advocating for Artsakh's integration into Azerbaijan. These are horrific things that we are seeing in real time. And what is the answer to this? As someone who deals with these people on a daily basis, or organizations that deal with these people on a daily basis, what is it that we can do more of? Is it simply helping, trying to bolster the ANC, ANC Global in its efforts? Are there any concrete steps that we can take?
To start off, I think the notion that Armenians can, live under the guise of Azerbaijan is first and foremost a logical fallacy. If today, with a peacekeeping contingency here, with the attention of various state actors and world powers, Azerbaijan is trying to actively ethnically cleanse. Artsakh is actively trying to induce pressure by cutting off the electricity, by cutting them off from their only road and lifeline to the rest of the world, by cutting them off from food, supplies, and medicine. What will happen if Artsakh is under the total guise of Azerbaijan? So first and foremost, we know that that can't be a scenario where peace and whatever is likely, because today we don't see it. Today, under all these premises, we don't see it, and also because in places that Azerbaijan is currently occupying today, whether it's Hadrut or Shushi or any other areas, not a single Armenian lives there. And the Armenians that were left behind there were many times brutally killed and executed by Azerbaijan, not to mention the ongoing Armenophobia campaigns that they have integrated throughout their societies. I think in regards to the ambassador's comments and what we can do, obviously as citizens of the United States or folks with agency in these certain nations, we can always advocate against those statements. But I would actually also say that here, citizens of Armenia also have a say, and they need to vocalize it because she is the ambassador to Armenia. And that displeasure needs to come from one, the Armenian government, and two, the Armenian populace. Instead of always welcoming these folks with, unconditional, support and open arms, we need to take a more serious, a more responsible, a more adult look at these diplomatic relations, and we need to always hold these folks accountable. This isn't about cheerleading for one nation or another, the West versus the East. This is about holding everybody accountable to their word. And anytime that they say something as ludicrous or as incendiary as what the ambassador stated, we have to hold them accountable through every layer of society.
I mean, I haven't mentioned the Armenian government once, but now that you bring it up, what has the response from the Armenian government been? Whether it's about international representatives or Artsakh in general, being someone in Artsakh who is actively engaged in the rights of Artsakh and trying to alleviate this catastrophe. Please elaborate on that.
I think before we even talk about the response, we have to talk about the process of these discussions, the process of these talks. The fact that they don't center around voices from Artsakh, the fact that we don't have the will of the people of Artsakh leading this process as the voice from the quote unquote Armenian side is automatically flawed. And that's where we go, wrong in the first step. And secondly, I think that there seems to be very little, if no accountability in terms of certain remarks that are made by these ambassadors. For example, when the ambassador made her claims that the people of Artsakh can live, she hopes and thinks that they can live freely with all their rights guaranteed. We saw different factions, almost every faction of the Parliament of Artsakh, different leaders from the Ombudsman who just spoke to former state ministers to all the stakeholders in the nation put out very strong rebukes towards her statements. We haven't seen the same on the Armenian side, and this discrepancy between what the people, the voices, the elected representatives of Artsakh want and say, and the total silence on the Armenian side is a problem that needs to be carefully examined and obviously called out.
Thank you, Gev. And we could probably go on for another hour having this discussion, but I know your days are packed full of interviews and discussions with much more important people than me. So we will end this Twitter space for now. I appreciate your time. Everyone should follow Gev on Twitter. Everyone should visit the ANCA website. Everyone should do everything they can to push their representatives to do more than just think about Artsakh on a daily basis. There are concrete steps we can take. If it's something as small as being a rapid responder on the ANC website, which automatically sends letters and tweets to representatives directly from you, to supporting a few of the organizations that Gev mentioned. One is the Lorik Foundation. There's the Armenian Relief Society, the ANCA naturally. There are the Artsakh support body. Each one helps Armenians in Artsakh in a different way. And there isn't one need in Artsakh. Right now, they're slowly being starved to death. Their electricity. Gev, I believe it was you who posted a photo yesterday of Artsakh at night. It is completely pitch black. Um, I, uh, anyway, there's lack of electricity, lack of water, lack of food, lack of gas, and our representatives, some of them are doing more than others, but the governments of the West in general need to be doing more. Everyone should follow the Ombudsman of Armenia, the Human Rights Ombudsman, Gegham Stepanyan, um, on all different platforms, on Facebook, on Twitter. The information that he puts out, his 6-month report of Azerbaijan's violations, the regular posts that Gev and Geram put out um, are incredibly important. That's essentially it, everyone. Thank you very much. Again, we had Gev Iskajyan of the Armenian National Committee of Artsakh, Executive Director, and Gegham Stepanyan, the Human Rights Ombudsman of Artsakh. And I'm your host tonight, Ara Krikorian for 301. Have a wonderful night. Thank you very much, Gev.